And Emile, while my microphone wasn't working today, we thought it was you. It happens to be me, but that gave us enough time to really process the Samuel Umtiti news. So we have a lot to talk about today. We've got El Clasico to preview at the end. We've got some Barça Granada, unfortunately, to continue to go over. But I think where we start the show is with our old pal Samuel Umtiti and his commitment to the club, which is now longer, but also very much helps in the short term.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, look, I think you and I were chatting, and I completely agree with you that this is a win-win for all involved. I mean, Samuel Umtiti has, on the one hand, just functionally, this is a huge help to the club. Like, he reduces his annual salary, so it allows them to register Ferran Torres, which is huge. He has to make a longer commitment, but at the same time, there doesn't seem to be a huge market for his services even a year and a half from now. So at the very least, he's able to lock in all the money that he was, he'd agreed to, that he was contracted to receive, but do so in a way that provides the club with more flexibility and allows them to get, a new young star in the door. And, for all involved, I mean, the club should be really happy. He should be really happy. And, I certainly hope the fans take it easy on him now. At the very least, he's they figured out a way. He's going to be made whole as far as the money that he agreed to. And all the while he did what needed to be done to help the club in the short term as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just the word there is amortization, where the club is amortized his salary over the course of what was supposed to be a year and a half, and they've extended it through 2026. So he's just making a little bit more
4.5 instead of 1.5. Yeah.
Right. And I believe because that number is then going to get low enough next summer, 2023, that there is a termination fee that we've heard that is like possible, where the club can basically just buy him out at that point, because the number will be low enough and reasonable enough where it won't really destroy their salary number either. So yeah, for Umtiti, who's played all of 90 minutes this season, this deal to be done. I'll talk about like the fan reaction to him and all that in a second, but it's very clear that this situation is very different than Coutinho's, because with Umtiti's injuries, and you would understand this, right? I think from a business perspective, where I do defend Umtiti a little bit, is that people say, oh, he needs to have more. Why is he not full of shame? As a player, if you want to be the best, why are you not like taking less money? But I think it actually tells a lot more about where he's at in his career than where Coutinho might be. Umtiti, because of his knee injuries, we saw the level he was at. We know, I mean, it's a well-trod path. The knee injuries happened, 2018 World Cup. He doesn't have surgery. Instead, he wins a World Cup. That's what he chose to do with his career. He has never been the same player, will never be the same player, a shell of himself, still under the age of 30. And for him, the contract he signed for Barcelona, he will never receive that money again. That's it. Right. We know that he will never, ever be able to get back physically to where he would, to where he was even. And even then, when he signed that contract, he was 24, which means he was entering his peak. And so any contract he ever signs again is going to be 1/10 of that number. And so him, his family, everybody involved in his peripheral wants to basically make the money that he had earned when he signed that contract. Because Barca gave him that deal because he was coming off, and people trying to do revisionist history, but I said on the show 4 years ago that he was one of the top 3 to 5 center backs in the world in 2017. And I stick by that. I thought he was, and that is the contract that Barca paid for. So yeah, unfortunately they are on the hook to deal with that contract. And I think, again, he earned that contract then, and he just hasn't been able to make good out of it because of those injuries he had. And Barca didn't put a what is it called? A force de jour or a force de jour. Now I found something. So the act of God.
Force majeure.
Force majeure, where basically they could have said, hey, your injuries were just, too much. Like we were able to terminate you early, which it didn't do. Like they trusted him. And as was the case with a lot of Bartomeu contracts, there wasn't a lot of out for the club.
But yeah, and while that's true, that one of all the contracts that were handed out during the Barto era, I completely agree with you. It was fully justified. I mean, prior to the 2018 World Cup, this guy was a colossus. He was as untouchable as I remember. I wrote a piece kind of, previewing the Barca players that will be at the World Cup and just kind of summing them up. I remember I wrote about Umtiti at the time that he was the most important player on the squad, not named Messi. And I stand by, I stood by it then, I stand by it now. At that time, that was true. And there was no conceivable way that you could let this guy, start winding down his contract or get unhappy. He was that level of untouchable. He was an absolute rock at the back. And they gave him the contract that he deserved. I mean, for all the hilarious missteps and misfires of the Bartomeu regime, this was not one of them. What's happened in hindsight? I mean, it was good process, bad result.
Right.
I mean, you do that every time. And if the guy gets hurt, that sucks, but it was a risk worth taking.
It's also too, his salary at the time was also based on the salary structure that was created. Looking at the number, his number was based on what Sergio Roberto was making at the time.
Yeah.
A very similar number. And so, I mean, that's why they're making similar numbers now as Roberto is working on his renewal, and whether or not the club is basically going to do the same thing to Roberto, who's one of the captains and one of their own, where it's basically, do we just extend his contract for 2 more years at smaller numbers, or do we attempt to just eat it and potentially let him walk for free? Or do we really want Sergio Roberto? Like, those are all questions about Roberto, which I think him being Catalan and him being a captain makes it even more complicated than the Umtiti situation. But yeah, the salary it's also an indictment that Umtiti gets the blame for, but it's an indictment of, that all contracts, all salaries, the entire financial system at Barcelona had just gone haywire. And part of that is the fact that Messi was making so much, it continued to push all those numbers forward. And that just continued to be a problem. So it sounds like, I'm going full in on the defense of Umtiti or whatever, but it's just, this is one of the last vestiges. You could be frustrated by the situation, but this is one of those last vestiges of continuing to clean up the mess. And where I'm going to turn this completely positive is, instead of talking about Umtiti anymore, because I think with this contract extension, I mean, for all the hand-wringing you could say about the past summers, right? Like, if Umtiti had done this, would Messi be able to stay? No, like, it continues to be all the things that happened. Griezmann being loaned out, Messi having to leave on a free, all of that still had to happen for any business to be done at all. So I want to make that
was just to start playing this year,
right? With Memphis and
Messi.
Right. Yeah. So I just want to make that very, very clear. So even if Umtiti made the decision earlier, it really wouldn't have changed that much. And now Umtiti doing this club this quote unquote favor, right? But by getting what he's deserved and by doing this club the favor, it does set up, it's a good situation for everybody. It's a win-win that now Umtiti can he has the flexibility to either go away for a year and try in 2022, 2023 to basically find his place in professional football, or listen, he can still fight for his spot at FC Barcelona, and then he's a free agent in 2023 anyway, because he signs off for that, to have his club terminated.
He can be bought out.
So if he really believes in himself, sure, do that. That said, again, I'm going to spin this in that Matteo Alemany, and it's not all the credit to him, because there are a lot of other voices and hands and agents and different people and financial consultants doing their jobs. But what Matteo Alemany has done in 6 months, we're talking about the big picture. Like, as much as Holland is the thing we're now talking about because that's what gets clicks or whatever, there is still this huge mess. And I think for those who've kind of been in it, I mean, again, I host 2 shows a week, so I'm constantly in the wage numbers and being asked questions, all this stuff. So for him to, that being Alemany, first, the Dembele situation was always in the player's hands. I want to make that very clear. Even over the summertime, he didn't have to renew. And it's that whole thing where, you're kind of, if a player doesn't want to stay, you are at the mercy of the player who doesn't want to stay, especially if he's a valuable piece for the club. And the club has just lost the greatest player of all time. Like, that's put you in a really tough spot to be in. So the Dembele situation, but for that not to be resolved now here in the wintertime, potentially, but you still able to register Ferran Torres, who was the cheapest big option on the market, who agreed to reduce his salary to come to the club, and who will actually be a help to the attack, and to also find a way to have Coutinho's wages largely figured out for the next 6 months, so you can register Ferran Torres and potentially even some kind of, break the class in case of emergency center back, which we'll talk about in a second with Garcia. But for him to do all of that in a matter of 6 months it's great business. It's to bring in Ferran Torres, to get Coutinho off the books for 6 months, and to restructure this Umtiti deal, to restructure the PK deal was a thank you to the club. And listen, I usually would be frustrated by all of his tweeting, but Gerard Piqué, go in your victory lap. Basically, that's what this is. Do speak your piece.
Yeah. I mean, the Piqué thing was, and I don't say this in any way to speak against Alemany, but I think the Piqué salary reduction was very much, that was something that Gerard Piqué was kind of always going to do, irrespective of who was at the helm.
Same thing with the Dani Alves deal, by the way. Like, it was like needed, and Dani Alves has taken less money.
Dani Alves is like, I'll play for 130 grand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, Yeah, but I agree with you. As far as being able to shift the overwhelming majority of the Philippe Coutinho uh, obligation, at least for 6 months, because this is what it is right now. You know, whether it was the loan to Bayern or this move, I mean, he's just on such a massive salary, and his stock has fallen so dramatically that you just kind of have to piecemeal solutions. Like there isn't a, try as they might, there's not a clean way out of the whole thing. So this is very much just kind of chipping away at the iceberg of the obligation that is, Coutinho's contract. And yeah, and I mean, similarly, it's the Umtiti thing was similar, but yeah, I mean, at this point, it brings the annual number down to a palatable number. And yeah, and I mean, they were able to get Ferran Torres, and I mean, obviously, he made a decision that he would take a reduced salary. Just coming back to Spain and coming to FC Barcelona and playing for Barça meant enough to him that he didn't need to wring, every last euro out of his contract that he could. He made his deal. I mean, I'm sure he'll in better financial times, I'm sure he'll get a contract renewal that maybe compensates him a little bit and makes him a little bit more whole, for the sacrifices he made. Yeah, but I mean, everything that Alemany's done in a span of 6 months it's spectacular. I mean, it's, we were speaking every week, particularly right around the start of the season, and even, for the first month or two, at least, everything it had this almost like this funereal vibe to it, because it was, they can't afford to do anything. Like they don't have, they can't pay someone $100 to play for them, let alone, millions. And yeah, I mean, they've done more than simply just shuffling deck chairs around. I mean, he's made real meaningful changes, and he's allowed the club to actually have some flexibility and add bona fide talent.
Right. And for Laporta too, to give him a bit of a compliment on this too. Like, I mean, I was fearful and critical at the time. I had said that it sounded like Victor Font had a bigger, at least Victor Font had a better laid out plan that he was willing to be public. And I mean, clearly Laporta, his plan was the same one he had back in 2003. And it's that take smart football people, put them in charge of things and let them do their thing. And then I'll just smile and shake hands. And, I've got friends with Mino Raiola and Goldman Sachs, and I've got my connections, and I'm just going to be the smiley businessman that I am and be this magnanimous figure. Right. And Laporta, at the time, of course, I mean, if Barca were a private enterprise, they would have had to go bankrupt just as Laporta was coming in charge. So the compliment to Laporta is that he has let his people do their jobs, and he picked the right people. So he does deserve compliments on his leadership that he, because it was worrying. I mean, a shuffling of the deck. I mean, we would have thought that Roman Planas leaving would have been, absolute catastrophe. And it might be with losing his scouting mind in the future. Sure. Like they could miss out on talent, so it's going to be frustrating. But the simple fact is, like, I think people forget how long a process is going to be, where we can discuss how hard it is to come back with results, where the club, it is worrisome if you're dropping out of the Europa League, not making that Champions League money, just, having your bottom line be lessened and not getting results, not competing for La Liga. Those are all really worrying things, where a club can stay in that state of stasis and you get stuck, you're kind of spinning your tires without getting back to the elite. And that can happen. However, for this club financially, we had spoken that it was going to take 2 to 3 years. And if in a matter of less than a year, remember, it was March of 2021 when Laporta stepped into that job. And if the club was able in 1 year's time to go from being able to say, because that's the whole thing, it doesn't matter, I think, and not saying it's not a victory if the club says, oh, well, what if Erling Haaland comes, right? It'll be a great success if Erling Haaland comes. But to me, I think Kool-Aid's, as again, it's not fun because you're not celebrating really anything, but the fact that the club was in the state that it was in, and now you can say that, I mean, Erling Haaland might be possible. So it actually, like, whether or not he happens isn't actually the point here financially. The point is, it's a huge victory for the club that he is possible. And that means that it doesn't matter if you get Haaland or not. If you can purchase great players for the cost of Erling Haaland, that in itself completely revitalizes a squad.
If you're back playing in the big leagues as far as transfers are concerned,
in 1 year's time,
Yeah, I was gonna say inside of 2 years, even that's brilliant. That's phenomenal. And I think like so much of the work that's been done, to your point, is like there's nothing sexy about kind of reinforcing the roof on the house. You know what I mean? Or like
Right.
or fixing your, I don't know, like insulation and things like that. These aren't spectacular things that make people ooh and ah.
Yeah.
But
Well, my example right now, Emile, where you're listening to this podcast and I'm on my old mic right now because
yeah,
I have to get a new part. I wanted to get a new actual microphone, but now I actually wind up having to fix an old problem so I don't have to go on a lesser microphone. And that's, I feel you, FC Barcelona.
Yeah, exactly. And like Erling Haaland's like getting the hot tub for the backyard, but
exactly.
but you need to reinforce the roof and make sure the insulation works and your floors are okay and all that stuff. And you don't give it much thought unless like there's something wrong with it. Like you don't think about the roof on your house unless it's leaking. Right. But they've done a great job of plugging the leaks. I mean, the roof was leaking, I mean, it was bad. And at least now we're able to have conversations. Yeah, like you said, the fact that we can even invoke Erling Haaland's name with like more than a shred of sanity, like without just being completely unhinged is fantastic.